Hi, I'm Izza, aka EvilCleverDog, and welcome to my channel. This video is part 2 in a 3-part Doom Eternal video series I've made in collaboration with Bethesda UK. For this video series, Bethesda have sent me 3 of their awesome Doom Eternal Collector's Edition helmets, and it's my job to transform these helmets into 3 different Slayer skins from Doom Eternal. In part 1, I made the gold skin helmet, which you can see right here, so if you haven't seen that video yet, please do go and check it out. In this video, which is part 2, I'm going to show you how I'll transform this collector's edition helmet right here into the badass, fiery Hotrod Skin helmet. Before I do anything, I need to mask off the visor so it doesn't get paint on it. For this, I use frog tape, which is a painter's masking tape. I also flip the helmet over and cover the rubber piece that sits around the neck. Once the visor is fully sealed off, I use a spray primer to coat the helmet in preparation for painting. This will make the surface take paint much more easily and also make the entire helmet one unified neutral colour and working surface. There are a few different colours and tones in the Hotrod helmet. For the base layer, I'm using a gunmetal spray paint. For the lighter grey patches, I mix neutral grey with bright iridescent silver so it still has a slight metallic sheen to it, and carefully paint it on by hand. It took 2 layers to get the coverage I wanted. Some of the light grey segments had to match particular patterns on the original helmet design. To recreate these markings, I used an unpainted helmet as a reference to create stencils. I cover the markings I need to make stencils for with thin masking tape and trace the design on. I repeat this process for each of the markings that appear on the Hotrod helmet. I then remove the tape, stick it onto paper and cut out the stencil. Using my new stencils, I paint on the markings. When I'm done with the stencil, I carefully remove it and do a few touch-ups by hand. I repeat this process for the markings on the back as well. Some of the markings contained elements that couldn't fit onto the stencil, such as the small circles, so I painted these by hand. To use the stencils for the opposite side of the helmet, I make sure the stencil is dry and simply flip it over to the other side and place it on the helmet. For the dark grey segments, I painted on 2 layers of Payne's grey by hand. Where I needed to recreate markings from the original helmet for the dark areas, I used the same process of making stencils again. On the sides of the helmet there were also some lighter silver patches. For these areas I marked them on in pencil and then painted them in silver mixed with a little iridescent white. now need to mask off parts of the helmet to spray paint the gold sections, so first I spray on a layer of sealer varnish. I again use frog tape to mask off sections of the helmet, leaving the spots I need to be gold exposed. Some of these areas were a little fiddly, such as masking off the flat surface underneath the ridges on the side of the helmet. I cut out small, thin strips of frog tape and used tweezers to place them into these difficult to reach spots. I then spray bright gold spray paint onto these sections and leave it to dry fully before removing the masking. Because I sealed off my paint before, the frog tape doesn't strip away any of the paint underneath when I remove it. There were still a few more final markings and touches to do on the rest of the base paint job. For the serial numbers, the stencils ended up being too small, so I drew them on by hand in silver Sharpie, then went over them with the grey and silver paint mixture in a fine detail brush to colour match them to the other light markings. There's a thin gold line going around the visor which I hadn't been able to mask off when I sprayed the initial gold sections. So I used frog tape and cling film to mask off the area around this line and spray it on in bright gold. For the mark of the Doomslayer on the front of the helmet, I used the same stencil I already made for the gold helmet in part 1 and painted it on in neutral grey mixed with a little black. With the many different tones of the base paint job done, I used satin spray varnish to seal off the entire helmet before moving on to weathering. I begin my weathering process with a layer of black wash over the entire helmet. With plenty of water on my brush, I paint areas in black, then use damp kitchen towel to wipe most of the paint away and blend it in, creating the impression of shading and wear and tear on the helmet. I especially want to make sure the black paint gets into all the lines, crevices and recesses of the helmet. I use burnt umber to further weather the gold areas, as the brown tone makes for good weathering on gold. I also use the same burnt umber to create some very light rust effects in certain areas. Rust would gather in areas of metal where moisture is most likely to be trapped, so I paint the brown dripping out of some of the recesses in the helmet and blend it in. For a final touch of weathering, I do some highlights with dry brushing. Using dry, rough bristled brushes, first I brush a paler gold over the edges of the gold sections to add some subtle highlights there. I then use a rich silver paint to dry brush all over the helmet, on both the silver and gold sections. This is a subtle effect to create the impression that some parts of the helmet have been scratched and chipped away to reveal the raw metal underneath, and to highlight the edges of the helmet to really define them and show off the details in the design. With the paint job on this part of the helmet done, I seal it again. I then remove the masking over the visor. My next task is to paint the visor itself, so I use my trusty frog tape to mask off the area surrounding the visor. To paint the visor, I was initially going to use Tamiya paints, which are clear coloured paints. However, because the visor itself is so dark and I really wanted to make sure the visor was as brightly coloured as my reference images, I decided to use acrylic paints instead. Because this helmet is going to be a display piece, I don't mind making the visor unable to be seen through if it means making it look really cool. In the in-game footage the visor is orange, but in other artwork it has this beautiful fiery gradient that I really want to recreate. I did use orange Tamiya paint as a primer for the visor, so that it would take acrylic paint better and change the visor's tone to a warmer one to work on. Once the Tamiya paint was dry, I began painting the visor with deep yellow and medium red acrylics. It took a couple of layers to get an even coverage, and I used a hairdryer to speed up the drying process. I gradually bring the two colours together and then use a sponge to carefully blend them into each other, creating the fiery gradient. I then use a medium yellow to highlight around the very edge of the visor and blend it in. I also carry some of the yellow colour up to the top of the visor. I I then use a deep red to create a little tonal difference in the red section. I seal off the visor with spray varnish and then remove the tape. I had a few minor touch-ups to do around the very edge of the visor when I removed the tape, just to make sure everything was neat. Then after a final touch of spray sealer, I also removed the tape from the rubber section underneath the helmet. I decided that I still wanted to add some finishing touches to the helmet, so I use a nail file to lightly scratch and sand a few areas of the helmet to create some really subtle battle damage. I then use burnt umber to very lightly weather the visor, just enough to low-light the lines in the visor and make them look recessed and defined. I then painted a layer of gloss Mod Podge over the visor to give it a slightly different finish to the rest of the helmet. Here's the completed Hot Rod helmet. This was a really fun and interesting multi-layered painting challenge. I love the contrast between the dark metal and the bright gold, and of course the vivid, fiery gradient colours of the visor. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe so you can catch part 3 of the Doom Eternal video series, where I will make a different helmet from Doom Eternal. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at EvilCleverDog, where I post cosplay and crafting updates. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.